Hi everyone, this is Hannah, and this is my action research project presentation. So as I just mentioned, I'm Hannah, Hannah Weidel, and I'm in the Assessment Curriculum and Teaching program with a focus in online instruction. And this is my last class, so I am almost there. Where I teach, I'm an itinerant autistic support teacher for the Lancaster Lebanon IU13 in the Hempfield School District. So the purpose of my study was to determine the impact of video modeling on social thinking instruction with students with autism. So my caseload is all students that have been diagnosed with autism that the school has either diagnosed themselves or has accepted an outside diagnosis from someone else. And I mainly work on social thinking instruction as well as emotional regulation. And one thing, video modeling has started to pop up, I'd say, within the last 2 years. And with my students' needs and with all of them being so individualized and all requiring, different things, curriculum's really hard. There are some really great curriculums out there that teach social thinking instruction or emotional regulation, but for a lot of my students, I just can't sit there and go through like a whole, textbook. I have to kind of pick and choose. So video modeling was intriguing to me. It's not something I ever use it consistently, so I thought this would be a great opportunity to do that. My research question was, how does video modeling impact social thinking instruction for students with autism spectrum disorder? So my background, I really liked the research part of it. It was difficult at first, but once I got rolling, I felt good about the articles that I did choose. So video modeling is one way to teach social skills to students with specific social needs that struggle to develop the skills naturally. So, like I said, video modeling is kind of new, at least, within the last few years. So I kind of just started with my research with looking at video modeling as not necessarily focusing on students with autism. And then I kind of focused on the video modeling with students with autism. Now, autism is like a very wide spectrum. You can go from having very nonverbal students to having students that are gifted and get straight A's and fully verbal. So I tried to look at all ranges of that. One of the articles I did have talked about, the nonverbal students and even just trying to get them to like make eye contact with you when you walk in like a room and greet them. I even looked at students with emotional disturbance and using those coping skills properly. So I kind of looked at a wide variety of, disabilities, how video modeling was used, because there are different types of video modeling, which I wasn't fully familiar with. So that was interesting to me, as well as one of my articles just kind of talked about, how would you create your own video modeling and the benefits of that. One of the common themes, though, was all the benefits. I really can't say that I found a huge negative. Some of the articles did talk about the generalization of the skill. So this is one thing I'll talk about down the line. It's great when the students can do it one-on-one with me in the like in our sessions. But what's even better is when they can do it out in the classroom, when they're working in a group, or when they respond to their teacher in an expected way. So the design, my data was collected throughout my lessons and probes based off the students' IEP goals and objectives. To grade, I use a teacher-made rubric. So they get 2 points if they answer the question independently and correctly, 1 point if they require one prompt to answer and they get it correct, and 0 points if they answer incorrectly or require more than one prompt. So I collect my data and I compared it to last year's data, which was kind of tricky because I stopped collecting data, in March due to the COVID closure. So, also, I guess I should say is I used 11 of my students that I used last year. I just did not feel comfortable using another teacher's data and comparing my data to that. We all teach differently. especially in my instruction, we're really all over the place because it's not like we follow a curriculum and teach the same way. We all teach very different, and we all focus on different aspects of the students' goals. We all see our students differently. So I picked the 11 students I had last year that I also had again this year. My students also took a pre and post assessment, which was on Google Forms. 10 questions. I had some multiple choice. I had some fill in the blank. I had a matching, I believe. And they took that for me. So my findings, you do this, you expect the post assessment to be better than the pre assessment. As you can see, for some of my students, it was the case. For others, they were very close in their average, and for some of them, they did better on the pre-assessment. So I looked at a few of my students in particular, and especially the students that had done better on the pre-assessment than the post-assessment, and I kind of try to figure out why. So for some of those students, they were quarantined, and they were not doing virtual instruction, so I did not always meet with them after they took the pre-assessment. For some of them, this school year's just been really, really rough. I have students that came from, a classroom where they were one of 5 students in a therapeutic emotional support classroom, and now we threw them into, going to 7 classes a day in a full regular education classroom. I have other students that are fully virtual, and doing work at home is a lot different than doing work at school, even on my one-on-one sessions. And in general, it's just a really crazy year. As I mentioned, I also looked at last year's goal compared to this year's goal after the intervention. As you will see, student 4 and student 7, student 9, they don't have last year's goal number 1. So that means we had an IEP after March 15th, 13th, whenever we closed on that time. So I didn't have any new data on their goal from last year. For the most part, I know I wasn't too concerned with this. We did see some changes in data given that, last year instruction was a little crazy, so they missed out on a few. And then even this year's just it's different. My students are hanging on, and as much as I did my instruction and I still was very thorough in doing my video modeling, that's not always where the need was. So I'd do the video modeling and then I'd kind of have to shift gears. Or, I'd get called into something else or into a class with the student and they'd watch the video modeling on their own and we couldn't dissect it. There was just a lot of different factors. And again, with the quarantining and the just still getting into a new middle school schedule. It's hard for some of my students or even my 8th graders. There's been a huge change from last year. They didn't come back to the same middle school that they left back in March. So kind of just getting that change and accepting it has been hard. Goal number 2, kind of the same thing. No huge jumps. Some of them, last year was better. As you can see, student 7, again, IEP date was after March, so I didn't have any data to compare it to from last year. Student 8 and 9, they don't have a second IEP goal. They only have one for me, so that's why it's blank there. Again, you have that expectation that things are going to be better after your intervention, and for me, it just wasn't the case. And looking at my data, they're trying their best. We're hanging on. And I think that's what matters right now. So my conclusion, I need to keep in mind these outside factors that are affecting my students and their behaviors. Another thing I really want to focus on, which is ironic for this year, remaining a constant for my students so that rapport is kept and so that we can continue to work on sensitive behavior topics. For a lot of them, I work on some things that they don't always want to talk about. No kid wants to come to somebody and talk about how they can't work in a group or that they, can't appropriately cope when things don't go their way. So there's sensitive behavior topics that I work on. Rapport is like my number one thing, and I'm thankful that a lot of my students are familiar with me from having them kind of a few years. But I do have a few new ones, and building rapport is always my top priority. But again, it's been difficult. I had to quarantine, some of them have had to quarantine, and I'll be going on a maternity leave soon, and they're gonna have a teacher shift, and I anticipate some craziness from that. Um, Lastly, one thing that I mentioned was kind of the generalization of skills earlier. So looking at this data, this it's all kind of all over the place, but I'd really like to work on and focus more on the generalization of skills, focus kind of less on the data and more of what they can actually do out in their classes, which I could turn into data and I could easily incorporate that into an IEP goal. And that's what I want to do moving forward. Because like I said, doesn't matter if they can do it one-on-one with me. They need to be able to do it in the moment. And I am not always available to be called. And, if they're working on a group project, I'm not always available to move my sessions around and, help and support in that time. And as they get older, they need to be able to do it independently. So I really want to focus on that, pushing into the classroom and incorporating those types of things into my goals to better my students and better their social skills and emotional regulation techniques. So I think kind of looking at that data, looking at all the changes kind of helped me shift my thinking to this. So thanks for listening.